The rain slashed sideways across the open Wyoming plains, cutting through Olivia Sinclair's soaked wool coat like a knife through warm butter. She had lost her horse 3 miles back, spooked by lightning that seemed to dance too close for comfort, and now she stood drenched and shivering at the crossroads of desperation and pride. The year 1878 was proving as unforgiving as the terrain she'd foolishly tried to navigate alone. Through the curtain of water, she spotted the warm glow of a campfire tucked beneath a rocky overhang. A figure moved there, silhouetted against the flames. Olivia hesitated, her hand instinctively reaching for the small derringer hidden in the folds of her skirt. In these parts, strangers often meant trouble, especially for a woman alone. As if sensing her presence, the figure turned. A tall man in a wide-brimmed hat stepped partially into the rain, his features obscured by shadow and distance. "I've got room beside my fire," he called over the downpour, his voice carrying a gravelly timbre that somehow cut through the storm's fury. Olivia remained frozen, water dripping from her once elegant hat, now a sodden mess atop her auburn hair. Trust was a luxury she'd surrendered long ago. "I don't bite, madam," the man added, "but this storm sure might. Offering shelter ain't the same as offering trouble." The wind changed direction, sending a fresh deluge down her back. Pneumonia would kill her as surely as any outlaw might. With a deep breath, Olivia stepped forward, her boots sinking into the mud with each careful step. As she approached, the man's features became clearer. A strong jaw darkened with several days' worth of beard, eyes the color of faded denim, and shoulders broad enough to suggest he was no stranger to hard labor. He wasn't young, perhaps in his mid-30s, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of squinting into harsh sunlight. "Garrett Thorne," he said simply, stepping back to give her space. "Coffee's hot if you're interested." "Olivia Sinclair," she replied, her voice trembling slightly from cold. "And yes, I would appreciate some coffee, Mr. Thorne." "Just Garrett," he corrected, gesturing toward the fire. "Got some beans and bacon, too, if you're hungry." The overhang was deeper than it had appeared from a distance, forming a shallow cave that provided genuine shelter. His camp was orderly bedroll neatly arranged, provisions organized in saddlebags, and a pair of fine-looking pistols within easy reach. A dappled gray horse stood tethered nearby, seeming unbothered by the storm. Garrett handed her a tin cup of steaming coffee without another word. The heat from the metal seeped into her frozen fingers, and the aroma momentarily distracted her from her predicament. "Thank you," she managed, taking a tentative sip. The coffee was strong and bitter, but wonderfully warm. "What brings a lady like yourself out in weather like this?" he asked, settling across the fire from her. "These plains ain't exactly forgiving, even on a good day." Olivia considered her words carefully. "My horse spooked during the storm, threw me and bolted. I was heading to prosperity." Garrett's expression remained neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Prosperity's still 20 miles west. That's quite a journey for a woman alone." "I wasn't planning to be alone," she said, the bitterness creeping into her voice before she could stop it. He didn't press further, instead focusing on turning the bacon in the small skillet propped over the fire. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the persistent drumming of rain and the occasional crack of thunder. "I can take you to prosperity tomorrow," he finally offered. "Once the storm passes." Olivia studied him over the rim of her cup. His offer seemed genuine, but she'd learned the hard way that kindness often came with conditions. "Why would you do that?" Garrett shrugged. "Heading that direction anyway. Besides, leaving a lady stranded wouldn't sit right with me." "And what payment would you expect for this assistance?" she asked directly. His eyes snapped to hers, a flash of surprise, perhaps even offense crossing his features. "Madam, I may be rough around the edges, but my mother raised me better than that. No payment necessary." Embarrassment warmed Olivia's cheeks more effectively than the fire. "I apologize for the implication. Recent experiences have made me cautious." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "No offense taken. These are hard times in hard country." He offered her a plate with a portion of bacon and beans. "Eat something. Best way to chase the chill." As the evening progressed, Olivia's sodden clothes began to steam in the fire's heat. Garrett lent her a woolen blanket that smelled of horse and tobacco, but was blessedly dry. They spoke little, each watching the other with the wariness of people accustomed to life's disappointments. When it came time to sleep, Garrett simply rolled his bedding to the far side of their shelter. "I'll keep watch for a spell," he said, settling with his back against the rock wall, rifle across his knees. "Rest easy, Miss Sinclair." Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Olivia. The stranger across the fire represented everything uncertain about her future: wild, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. Yet something in his quiet dignity offered a comfort she hadn't expected to find on this rain-soaked night. The storm continued its assault on the Wyoming wilderness, but beneath the stone overhang, an uneasy truce formed between two souls adrift in their own private tempests. Morning arrived with grudging reluctance, the storm having moved eastward but leaving behind a pewter sky that threatened its return. Garrett was already awake, or perhaps had never slept, when Olivia opened her eyes. He had coffee brewing again and was saddling his horse. "Weather's giving us a window," he said, nodding toward the sky. "Best make use of it." Olivia sat up, attempting to smooth her wrinkled dress and arrange her hair into something resembling propriety. The effort felt futile. She looked as if she'd been dragged backward through the wilderness. Which, in a manner of speaking, she had been. "Do you have family in prosperity?" Garrett asked as he offered her another cup of coffee. "No," she admitted, accepting the cup. "I have a position waiting. Teaching at the new school," he nodded, seeming unsurprised. "Town's growing. Lots of families moving in now that the railroad's coming through. They'll be glad to have a proper teacher." "And you, what business takes you to prosperity?" Something guarded passed over his features. "Just passing through. Got some matters to settle." Olivia recognized evasion when she heard it, but chose not to probe. Everyone had their secrets, after all. Hers were packed neatly in the valise that was now miles away, likely ruined by rain and mud. "We should reach town by nightfall if we keep a steady pace," Garrett continued, gathering his few belongings with practiced efficiency. "Can you ride?" "Yes, though it's been some time since I've ridden astride." He glanced at her dress, then back to his horse. "Gray here's gentle enough, but side saddle isn't an option, I'm afraid." "I'll manage," she assured him, already dreading the scandal of arriving in prosperity seated improperly on a horse with a strange man. Her reputation would be in tatters before she'd even begun her new position. As if reading her thoughts, Garrett said, "We'll stop outside town. I've got a spare shirt in my pack. You can wear it over your dress if you're concerned about appearances." The consideration surprised her. "Thank you." They set out as the clouds began to gather strength again. Garrett walked alongside the horse, one hand on the reins, setting a pace that ate away at the miles without exhausting either human or animal. Olivia sat uncomfortably, aware of her exposed ankles and the impropriety of her situation, but necessity quickly overshadowed social niceties. "You're not from around here," Garrett observed after they'd been traveling for several hours. "Boston originally," she confirmed. "Then St. Louis for a time. Long way from Boston to Wyoming territory." "Yes, well, circumstances change." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask. Instead, he pointed toward a distant ridge. Had a run-in with a Sioux War party there back in '67. Young fool that I was, thought I could outrun them. I take it you succeeded, considering your current state of being alive. The corner of his mouth quirked upward. Not exactly. They caught me easy enough. Chief turned out to be more interested in trading than taking my scalp. Lucky for me. As they continued, Garrett occasionally shared stories of the land they passed through, where to find water in drought seasons, which valleys flooded during spring thaws, what trails to avoid due to bandits. It was practical knowledge, delivered without flourish, but Olivia found herself hanging on every word. This harsh country would be her home now, and survival might depend on such details. You know this territory well, she observed during a brief rest. Been roaming it since the war ended. Came west with nothing but my daddy's pistol and a bad case of nightmares. He adjusted the horse's saddle, avoiding her eyes. Found it suits me better than anywhere else. Were you at Gettysburg? She asked softly, his hand stilled. Shiloh, then Chickamauga. The names fell from his lips like stones. Lost my brother at Vicksburg. I'm sorry. The words felt inadequate against such loss. Long time ago now. He resumed, checking the cinch straps. War has a way of making restless men of those who survive it. Is that what you are, restless? Garrett finally looked up at her, his expression unreadable. What I am, Miss Sinclair, is a man who knows when it's time to move on. Been the story of my life. Something in his tone suggested this was no mere philosophical observation, but a warning of sorts. Whatever brought him to prosperity was temporary. He was already planning his departure. By late afternoon, dark clouds had reclaimed the sky, and the temperature dropped sharply. Garrett frowned at the horizon. We're still a few hours out, he said. Another storm's rolling in fast. There's a lined shack about a mile ahead where we can wait it out. The thought of spending another night in this man's company should have alarmed Olivia more than it did. Yet the previous night had passed without incident, and she found herself trusting his judgment regarding the weather. They'd barely reached the dilapidated shack when the skies opened once more. The structure was little more than 4 walls and a mostly intact roof, but it offered better shelter than the previous night's overhang. Garrett quickly established a small fire in the ancient stone hearth while Olivia attempted to brush the mud from her skirts. "Whose place is this?" she asked, noticing the remnants of furniture, a broken chair, a table missing one leg. Used to belong to the Cassidy outfit. They ran cattle through here until Indians drove them out in '72. He arranged his bedroll far from hers, maintaining the same respectful distance he had established the previous night. Nobody claims it now except travelers caught in bad weather. Lightning flashed, illuminating the shack's interior in stark relief. Olivia caught a glimpse of Garrett's profile as he stared into the growing flames, his expression distant. For all his quiet competence and apparent openness, she realized she knew almost nothing about this man who held her fate in his hands. "Mr. Thorne," she began, settling onto her makeshift seat of saddlebags, "may I ask what exactly you do? For occupation, I mean." He continued, poking at the fire. "Bit of this, bit of that. Broke horses for a while, scouted for the army, drove cattle up from Texas twice." He shrugged. "Most recently, I've been hunting bounty." Olivia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. "You're a bounty hunter, when there's someone worth bringing in." His voice remained even, matter of fact. "Pays good when you succeed, nothing when you don't. And now, are you hunting someone in prosperity?" Garrett's eyes flicked up to meet hers. "Not exactly." Before she could press further, a particularly violent gust of wind rattled the shack's walls, sending a shower of dust down from the rafters. Olivia flinched, and Garrett was on his feet instantly, checking the stability of their shelter. "Should hold," he pronounced after a thorough inspection. "But we might be in for a long night." As darkness settled outside, the only light came from their small fire. Garrett produced a bottle of whiskey from his pack and offered it to Olivia. She hesitated, then accepted it, taking a small sip that burned all the way down. The warmth that spread through her chest was worth the momentary discomfort. "Not proper for a schoolteacher, I suppose," she murmured, returning the bottle. "Reckon proper went out the window when you got caught in yesterday's downpour," he replied with the barest hint of amusement. "Besides, no one here to judge but me, and I'm hardly one to talk." The whiskey and fire gradually loosened the knot of tension that had resided in Olivia's shoulders since leaving St. Louis. Against her better judgment, she found herself sharing more than she'd intended. "I was engaged," she said abruptly. "In Boston, to a banker's son." Garrett didn't respond, but his attention shifted fully to her. "Everyone said I was fortunate. George had prospects, family connections. The match was considered advantageous." She traced a pattern in the dust beside her. "Then his father's bank failed. Overnight, the advantageous match became less so." "He called it off?" Garrett asked quietly. "No, I did." Olivia looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "When I realized he expected me to support him through my father's modest inheritance, while he rebuilt the family name, my future was to be sacrificed for his ambition. So you came west instead. First to St. Louis, to stay with my aunt. I taught at a girls' school there while I looked for other opportunities. When I saw the advertisement for Prosperity." She shrugged. "It seemed like Providence, starting fresh." "Precisely. No one in Prosperity knows anything about me except what I choose to tell them." Garrett took another pull from the bottle. "Freedom has its appeal." "What about you?" she ventured. "What are you running from?" His eyebrows rose slightly. "What makes you think I'm running? Just an observation. You seem untethered." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Fair assessment, though I'd say I'm running towards something rather than away." "And what might that be?" "Peace, maybe." The word seemed to surprise even him. "The kind that stays, not just the quiet between storms." The vulnerability in his admission touched something in Olivia. For all his hard edges and mysterious past, Garrett Thorne was searching for the same elusive comfort that had driven her across half a continent. They talked long into the night, sharing stories that gradually revealed the contours of their lives without exposing too many painful details. She learned he'd grown up in Tennessee, the second son of a horse breeder. He discovered she had trained as a pianist before circumstances demanded more practical skills. Both had lost parents, hers to influenza, his father to the bottle, and his mother to grief. When exhaustion finally claimed them, Olivia fell asleep to the sound of rain and Garrett's steady breathing across the room, feeling strangely safer than she had in months. The morning brought clear skies and an unexpected awkwardness. The intimacy of their fireside confessions seemed out of place in daylight, and they prepared to depart with minimal conversation. Garrett was especially quiet, his earlier openness replaced by a businesslike efficiency. As promised, they stopped about a mile outside Prosperity. The town sprawled across a valley, larger than Olivia had expected, with sturdy buildings flanking a wide main street. Smoke rose from numerous chimneys, and even from a distance, she could see people moving about their business. "Here," Garrett said, handing her a clean but well-worn flannel shirt. "For appearances." Olivia slipped it on over her dress, rolling the two long sleeves up to her wrists. The garment smelled faintly of tobacco and leather of him, and she found the scent oddly comforting. "Thank you," she said, meaning far more than just the shirt. "For everything." He nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Town's growing fast, School's on the north end near the church. Mayor's name is Hathaway, pompous sort, but fair enough. Sheriff Daniels is a good man. If you have trouble, he's the one to see. The detailed information struck her as peculiar. You know the town well for someone just passing through. Something flashed across his features, regret, perhaps, or resignation. I've been here before. Recently? No. His tone discouraged further questions. We should get moving if you want to arrive before dark. As they approached the town limits, Olivia became acutely aware of curious glances from passers-by. A woman riding with a strange man, wearing what was clearly his shirt, would certainly start tongues wagging. She had hoped to begin her new life with dignity intact, but fate seemed determined to challenge her at every turn. Garrett led them directly to the sheriff's office, dismounting first and helping her down with formal politeness. The brief contact of his hands at her waist sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "Sheriff Daniels," he called as they entered the modest building. "Got someone here you should meet." A man with graying temples and a neatly trimmed mustache looked up from his desk, surprise registering on his face when he saw Garrett. "Well, I'll be damned," the sheriff said, standing. "Garrett Thorne. Didn't expect to see you back in prosperity." "Wasn't planning on it," Garrett replied evenly. "Circumstances intervened," he gestured to Olivia. "This is Miss Sinclair, your new schoolteacher. Found her caught in yesterday's storm after her horse bolted." Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face. "Miss Sinclair, we've been concerned. You were expected 2 days ago." "The weather delayed me considerably," Olivia explained, grateful for the opportunity to establish her narrative. "Mr. Thorne kindly offered assistance when I found myself stranded." Sheriff Daniels studied them both, his expression carefully neutral. "Well, we're glad you made it safely. Mrs. Hathaway has been preparing the schoolhouse and teachers' quarters. I'll take you there directly." Olivia turned to Garrett, suddenly reluctant to part ways. "Mr. Thorne, I cannot thank you enough for your assistance." He touched the brim of his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Sinclair." There was a formality to his tone that hadn't been there during their journey. "Sheriff, before you go, might I have a word, privately?" Daniels nodded. "Miss Sinclair, if you'll excuse us for just a moment." Olivia stepped outside, watching the townspeople go about their business. Prosperity seemed to live up to its name. The buildings were well maintained, the citizens well dressed. It was a far cry from the rough frontier town she had prepared herself for. When Garrett emerged, his expression was grim but resolved. "Sheriff, we'll see you settled," he said. "I need to attend to some business." "Will I see you again?" The question escaped before she could consider its propriety. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them, regret, perhaps, or a possibility not yet acknowledged. "Town's not that big, Miss Sinclair." With that cryptic response, he mounted his horse and rode toward the center of town without looking back. Sheriff Daniels escorted Olivia to a neat white building at the edge of town. The schoolhouse stood beside a small cottage that would serve as her residence. Mrs. Hathaway, the mayor's wife, greeted her with enthusiastic efficiency, barely concealing her curiosity about Olivia's bedraggled appearance and the man who had brought her to town. "The town council is quite relieved you've arrived safely," Mrs. Hathaway said as she showed Olivia around the cottage. "We have 27 children enrolled already, with more expected as winter approaches. Families are settling every month now that the railroad spur is confirmed." "It seems a prosperous community," Olivia observed. "Indeed, though we've had our struggles." The older woman hesitated. "I understand Mr. Thorne brought you to town." Olivia maintained her composure. "Yes, he was kind enough to assist me when my horse was lost in the storm." "How fortunate!" Mrs. Hathaway's tone suggested she found it anything but. Mr. Thorne has a certain reputation in these parts. Oh. Olivia kept her voice neutral despite her rising curiosity. He was involved in some unpleasantness here 3 years ago. The details aren't appropriate for a lady's ears, but suffice it to say, many were surprised to see him return. Before Olivia could press for more information, Mrs. Hathaway briskly changed the subject to school matters. By the time the woman left, Olivia's head was spinning with details about curriculum expectations, town families, and social obligations, but no further insights about Garrett Thorne. That evening, after a bath and change into the only clean dress from her recovered valise, Sheriff Daniels had sent a deputy to search for her belongings. Olivia sat on her small porch watching lamplight bloom across town as darkness fell. Her thoughts kept returning to the man who had sheltered her through 2 stormy nights, his quiet strength, his careful distance, the shadows that seemed to follow him. What unpleasantness had occurred here? Why had he returned to a place where he clearly had a complicated history? And why did she care so much about a man she'd known for barely 48 hours? The answer to the last question, at least, was becoming uncomfortably clear. Despite her best intentions to begin her new life unencumbered by emotional attachments, Olivia Sinclair found herself drawn to the enigmatic bounty hunter in a way that defied rational explanation. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind cycling through memories of firelit conversations and the brief warmth of his hands at her waist. By morning, she had resolved to focus on her new position and put Garrett Thorne firmly out of her thoughts. The resolution lasted precisely 3 days. Olivia threw herself into preparing the schoolhouse, organizing books and supplies, and meeting the families whose children would soon be in her care. The work was gratifying, the community welcoming if somewhat too interested in the circumstances of her arrival. She deflected questions with practiced grace, establishing herself as a dedicated educator rather than the subject of gossip. On the 3rd evening, as she was returning from dinner with the minister and his wife, she spotted a familiar figure emerging from the sheriff's office. Garrett looked different, clean-shaven, wearing a dark coat rather than his trail-worn gear, but his presence still caused her heart to quicken traitorously. He saw her at the same moment, hesitating before approaching with measured steps. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted her, hat in hand. "You're looking well. As are you, Mr. Thorne, considerably tidier than when we last met." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Town living demands certain adjustments, so you're staying in prosperity." She couldn't keep the surprise from her voice, for a time. His gaze moved past her to the church steeple, then back. "I've taken a room at the hotel while I conclude my business. The mysterious business that brought you here in the first place. The very same." He shifted slightly, glancing down the street where several townspeople watched their interaction with undisguised interest. "Perhaps I could walk you home. These streets can be treacherous after dark." The offer was transparent. He wanted to speak away from prying eyes, but Olivia found herself nodding agreement. They moved along the boardwalk in silence until they were beyond the main thoroughfare. "Sheriff Daniels tells me you're settling in well," Garrett said eventually. "Yes, though I haven't even begun teaching yet. That starts Monday." "Nervous, a little," she admitted, "but mostly eager. It's been some time since I've had a classroom of my own." He nodded, seeming genuinely interested. "The children here are a good sort. Bit wild maybe, but not mean-spirited." "You know them," a shadow crossed his features. "Knew some of their older siblings. Before the unpleasantness Mrs. Hathaway mentioned." Garrett stopped walking, his expression hardening. "Been asking about me, have you?" "Not deliberately," Olivia replied, unwilling to be cowed by his sudden coolness. but people seem eager to warn me about you without providing any actual information." He exhaled slowly, tension draining from his shoulders. "Suppose that's fair. Small towns have long memories. Would you prefer I hear the story from you or continue collecting whispers and half-truths?" The directness of her question seemed to surprise him. They had reached her cottage, standing in the shadows beyond the small circle of light cast by her porch lantern. "Not tonight," he said finally. "But soon, if you still want to know." "I do." The simple statement hung between them, carrying more weight than perhaps she intended. Garrett studied her face for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. "Good night, Miss Sinclair." "Good night, Mr. Thorne." He waited until she was safely inside before departing, his footsteps fading into the night. Olivia leaned against her closed door, heart racing from an encounter that should have been utterly mundane. Whatever history Garrett had in prosperity, whatever shadow hung over him, she was becoming dangerously invested in discovering it. The following days passed in a flurry of activity as school commenced. Olivia found herself challenged and delighted by her diverse group of pupils, from tiny 5-year-olds just learning their letters to teenagers tackling algebra and Latin. The work consumed her daylight hours, leaving little time for thoughts of Garrett Thorne, but evenings were different. As September gave way to October, bringing crisp nights and the first hints of winter, Olivia often found herself scanning the street for his tall figure. Occasionally, she would glimpse him entering the mercantile or leaving the sheriff's office, but their paths rarely crossed directly. When they did, their exchanges were cordial but brief, always under the watchful eyes of townspeople. It was Amelia Cooper, mother of twins in Olivia's middle group, who finally offered unsolicited information during a parent meeting. "I noticed Mr. Thorne attended your harvest recitation last week," she said as they discussed her son's progress. "Sat in the back, but stayed for the whole program." Olivia maintained her professional composure despite her surprise she hadn't seen him among the parents and townspeople who'd attended. "Did he?" "I wasn't aware." Mrs. Cooper's expression turned knowing. "He's changed since he was last here, quieter, less volatile." "I understand there was some incident previously." The woman glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. 3 years ago, his brother was killed outside the Silver Dollar, shot in the back during a card game gone wrong." Olivia's breath caught. "His brother? But he told me his brother died at Vicksburg during the war." "Different brother, I expect. This one was younger Owen Thorne. Wild as they come, that boy, always looking for trouble. Found it too that night." "What happened?" "Owen accused Franklin Powell, he owned the largest ranch outside town back then, of cheating at cards. Words were exchanged, then Owen was shot as he was leaving. Nobody saw who pulled the trigger, but everyone knew Powell had ordered it. And Garrett," Mrs. Cooper's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of sharing shocking information. "He came to town 3 days later, looking for revenge, confronted Powell right in the middle of Main Street. There was a gunfight. Powell and 2 of his men ended up dead, and Garrett was wounded something awful. Sheriff arrested him, but the judge ruled self-defense since Powell drew first. If it was ruled self-defense, why do people speak of him with such caution? Because before he left town, he swore he'd find whoever actually shot his brother in the back, said the real murderer was still walking free." Mrs. Cooper shook her head. "Made a lot of folks nervous, that promise. Powell had many friends in high places." The story filled in some gaps, but raised more questions than it answered. If Garrett had returned to fulfill that promise to find his brother's true killer, why was he spending time at town functions? And why had he helped Olivia so readily when he clearly had more pressing matters to attend to? That night, A soft knock at her door startled Olivia from her reading. Opening it cautiously, she found Garrett standing on her porch, hat in hand. "I apologize for the late hour," he said, his voice low, "but I saw your lamp still burning. Is something wrong?" "No, just—" He seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. "Thought you might want to hear that story now, the true version." Olivia hesitated only briefly before stepping back. "Come in." Inviting a man into her home after dark was scandalous by any standard, but Olivia found she cared less about Prosperity's opinion than she did about the truth Garrett offered. She gestured toward the small sitting room with its modest fireplace and two worn chairs. "Would you like tea?" she asked, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the setting. "No, thank you." He remained standing, hat turning slowly in his hands. "I expect you've heard things by now." "About your brother?" "Yes," Garrett nodded, his eyes fixed on the small fire. "Owen was 23 when he died. Too young for the war, so he never saw what it did to men. Never understood why I came back. Different. Mrs. Cooper mentioned a dispute over cards. That was just the excuse." His voice hardened. "Owen had been working at Powell's ranch. Discovered Franklin was rustling cattle from smaller spreads, changing brands. When he threatened to go to the sheriff, Powell had him killed. The card game was just to establish a public argument, give reasonable cause for what followed." "How do you know this?" "Owen wrote to me." Letter arrived the same day as the telegram about his death. Garrett finally met her eyes. "I wasn't looking for revenge, Miss Sinclair. I was looking for justice. The shootout with Powell wasn't my intention. I confronted him with what I knew, told him I was taking evidence to the territorial judge. He drew on me." His hand unconsciously moved to his side. "Took a bullet here before I could return fire. And now, why have you returned to Prosperity after 3 years?" Garrett set his hat on the small table between them. "Because I finally found proof of who actually pulled the trigger. A man named Howard Wells. He was Powell's foreman back then." "Is he still in Prosperity?" "Yes. Owns the Silver Dollar now, respected businessman." His tone was bitter. "Built his fortune on blood money Powell paid him for the killing." Olivia absorbed this information slowly. "What do you intend to do?" "The right thing. Bring him to justice through the law." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "That's why I've been meeting with Sheriff Daniels. Building a case. Not seeking revenge would be simpler," he admitted, "but I've seen enough killing, done enough." His voice dropped. "I want this finished properly." The raw honesty in his words touched something deep within Olivia. This was a man wrestling with his nature, choosing the harder path when violence would be easier. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. He looked at her then, truly looked at her, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because I've seen how this town watches you. How they whisper when we speak. Your position here matters to you, and being associated with me could complicate that. You're warning me away. I'm giving you the truth so you can decide for yourself. No deceptions between us." The implication that there was an us to consider hung in the air between them. Olivia rose from her chair, moving closer to where he stood. "I appreciate your honesty," she said, "and I'm capable of making my own decisions about whom I associate with. Even if it costs you standing in the community. My standing depends on my abilities as a teacher, not on town gossip." Something shifted in his expression, hope, perhaps, or relief. "You're not like anyone I've met before, Olivia Sinclair." The use of her first name sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Nor you, Garrett Thorne." For a moment she thought he might step closer, might bridge the narrow gap between them. Instead, he reached for his hat. "It's late. I should go." "Yes," she agreed, though reluctance colored her tone. At the door, he paused. "There's a harvest dance Saturday next. Would you consider attending with me? The invitation surprised her. "Would that be wise given your current situation?" "Probably not," he admitted with the ghost of a smile. "But I find wisdom isn't always my strongest quality where you're concerned." Olivia felt her cheeks warm. "Then yes, I would be pleased to accompany you." His eyes brightened. "I'll call for you at 7. After he left, Olivia stood at her window watching his figure disappear down the darkened street. The schoolteacher and the bounty hunter, it sounded like the beginning of a dime novel romance, improbable and surely ill-fated. Yet she couldn't deny the connection between them, forged in those rain-soaked nights and strengthened by each encounter since. Whatever came of Howard Wells and his reckoning with justice, Olivia knew her life in prosperity was now inextricably linked with Garrett Thorne's quest for closure. The knowledge should have terrified her. Instead, she found herself looking forward to Saturday with inappropriate eagerness. The harvest dance arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp air, golden sunlight, and trees blazing with color along Prosperity's Main Street. Olivia spent more time than she would admit selecting her dress, eventually choosing a deep burgundy gown with modest lace trim. It was the finest thing she owned, saved from her Boston days when such occasions were commonplace rather than exceptional. Garrett arrived precisely at 7, looking transformed in a well-tailored dark suit. He carried a small nosegay of late wildflowers and forest greenery, which he presented with formal courtesy. "You look beautiful," he said simply, his eyes conveying what proper etiquette would not allow him to express more explicitly. "Thank you." She pinned the flowers to her bodice, touched by the gesture. "You clean up rather impressively yourself, Mr. Thorne." The walk to the town hall was brief but conspicuous. Heads turned as they passed, whispers following in their wake. Garrett maintained a respectable distance between them, though his hand occasionally brushed hers in a way that seemed deliberate rather than accidental. The hall had been transformed with harvest decorations, dried corn husks, pumpkins, and paper lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played in the corner while couples circled the floor and others mingled around tables laden with food and drink. Their entrance caused a momentary lull in conversation before the mayor approached, his wife trailing behind with obvious reluctance. "Miss Sinclair, delighted you could join us." Mayor Hathaway nodded stiffly to her companion. "Thorne, Mayor," Garrett returned evenly. "Fine turnout." "Yes, well, Prosperity is growing, new families arriving weekly." The mayor's chest puffed slightly. "I understand you've been spending time with Sheriff Daniels. Any progress in your inquiries?" Something hard flashed in Garrett's eyes. "Some. Perhaps we could discuss it another time." Of course." The mayor turned back to Olivia. "The school board is most pleased with your work, Miss Sinclair. Most pleased indeed. Parents speak highly of your methods." "Thank you. The children are a joy to teach, Mrs." Hathaway stepped forward, her disapproval barely concealed behind a brittle smile. "Miss Sinclair, several young men have been asking if you would grace them with a dance. Mr. Peterson, the bank manager, seems particularly eager." The implication was clear. A respectable bank manager would be a far more appropriate partner than Garrett Thorne. Before Olivia could respond, Garrett spoke. "I believe Miss Sinclair promised her first dance to me." He turned to her with questioning eyes. "Unless you'd prefer Mr. Peterson's company." "I honor my commitments, Mr. Thorne," she replied, taking his offered arm. "If you'll excuse us, Mayor, Mrs. Hathaway." As they moved toward the dance floor, Olivia felt a small thrill of rebellion. That was rather direct. "Diplomacy has never been my strong suit," he admitted, positioning them for a waltz. "Especially when someone's trying to separate me from the most beautiful woman in the room." The compliment brought heat to her cheeks. "Careful, sir. People will think you're flirting with the schoolteacher." "I am." His hand settled at her waist as the music began. "Does that bother you?" "Not as much as it probably should." Dancing with Garrett proved surprisingly easy. He moved with natural grace, guiding her through the waltz with confidence that belied his frontier appearance. As they circled the floor, Olivia became aware of eyes following them, some curious, others disapproving, a few openly hostile. "Howard Wells is watching from near the punch bowl," Garrett murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "Don't look now." Olivia waited until their turn brought her a natural view of that area. A portly man in an expensive suit stood observing them, his expression calculating. "That's him. He looks so ordinary. Most killers do." Garrett's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "Sheriff's planning to make the arrest tomorrow. Wells doesn't know it yet." "Is that why you wanted to attend tonight, to watch him?" "Partly," he admitted. "But mostly I wanted to dance with you without a storm forcing us together." The honesty in his voice warmed her more than the exertion of dancing. "I'm glad you asked me." They completed several dances before taking a break for refreshments. As Garrett went to fetch punch, Olivia found herself approached by Howard Wells himself. "Miss Sinclair, isn't it?" "Our esteemed teacher." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Howard Wells, proprietor of the Silver Dollar, Mr. Wells." She nodded politely while maintaining her distance. "A pleasure. I see you've become acquainted with Thorne." Wells glanced toward where Garrett was engaged in conversation with Sheriff Daniels. "An interesting choice of companion. Mr. Thorne has been nothing but a gentleman. For now, perhaps." Wells lowered his voice. "But you should know he's a dangerous man with a vendetta. Not someone a respectable lady should associate with." Olivia met his gaze steadily. "I prefer to judge people by their actions toward me, Mr. Wells. So far, Mr. Thorne's have been exemplary." "Has he told you why he's really in prosperity, about his obsession with his brother's death?" "We've discussed it." Something shifted in Wells's expression, surprise, followed quickly by calculation. "Then you know he's convinced himself I had something to do with it. Delusions of a grief-stricken mind, I'm afraid." "Is that what they are?" Wells stepped closer, his affable facade slipping. "Be careful, Miss Sinclair. Attachment to the wrong sort can have consequences, particularly for someone in your position." The threat, however veiled, sent a chill through her. Before she could respond, Garrett appeared at her side, 2 cups of punch in hand and storm clouds in his eyes. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone deceptively casual. "Perfectly fine," Wells replied, stepping back. "Just introducing myself to our lovely teacher." He tipped his hat. "Think about what I said, Miss Sinclair. Good evening to you both." As Wells moved away, Garrett handed Olivia a cup. "What did he say to you?" He suggested I reconsider my choice of company. She took a sip of punch to steady herself, and implied my position might be at risk if I don't. Anger flashed across Garrett's features. "I shouldn't have left you alone." "I'm hardly helpless, Garrett. Besides, it only confirms what you've told me about his character." He glanced toward where Wells was now conversing with several town council members. "Still, I don't like him approaching you. There's more at stake here than he realizes." "What do you mean?" Before he could elaborate, the band struck up a lively polka. Garrett set down his untouched punch. "Dance with me again." They rejoined the dancers, but the earlier ease between them had been replaced by tension. Garrett's eyes frequently scanned the room, his attention divided. When the music ended, he led her toward a quiet corner. "I think we should leave," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Wells is gathering his men. Something's not right." Olivia glanced around the room, noting several rough-looking men who seemed out of place among the town families. "Do you think he knows about tomorrow?" "Possibly." Sheriff's been questioning people, building evidence. Someone might have talked. His hand found hers, squeezing gently. I don't want you caught in the middle if things turn ugly. The concern in his eyes touched her deeply. All right, but let me say good night to the Hathaways first. Leaving abruptly would only draw more attention. While Olivia made her excuses to the mayor and his wife, she saw Garrett exchange words with Sheriff Daniels. Both men looked grim as they surveyed the room. Whatever was brewing, it went beyond a simple arrest planned for morning. Outside, the autumn night had grown cold, stars sharp in the clear sky. Garrett offered his arm as they walked briskly toward her cottage. What's really happening? She asked once they were away from the town hall. Wells is making preparations to leave town. Sheriff spotted his foreman loading supplies at the livery earlier today. If he flees before morning, we lose our chance. So the arrest is happening tonight instead, Garrett nodded. Daniels is gathering deputies now. They'll move within the hour. And your role in this? His pace slowed slightly. I'll be there. Need to see it through. The implications hung heavily between them. If things went wrong, if violence erupted. Olivia squeezed his arm. Be careful, she said simply. They reached her cottage too quickly. On the porch, protected from curious eyes by darkness and the shelter of her small overhang, Garrett finally allowed himself to truly look at her not as a gentleman escorting a lady, but as a man facing uncertainty and finding something worth holding on to. Olivia, he began, then seemed at a loss for words. She stepped closer, propriety forgotten. Whatever happens tonight, I want you to know that meeting you even in that wretched storm has been the most unexpected blessing. His hand rose to touch her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. You deserve better than a man with my history. Perhaps I deserve to make that determination myself. The corner of his mouth lifted in a half-smile. Stubborn woman. Practical man. The distance between them vanished as Garrett lowered his head, his lips meeting hers with restrained tenderness. The kiss was brief but revelatory, a promise, a question, a beginning. When he pulled away, his eyes held both wonder and regret. I need to go, he murmured. But I'll come back when this is finished. I'll be waiting. He traced her cheek once more before stepping back. Lock your door. Stay inside until morning, no matter what you hear. The intensity of his warning sent a chill through her. You expect trouble. I expect Wells won't go quietly. He moved down the steps, already transforming from the gentleman who had escorted her to the dance into the harder man who had survived war and wilderness. Good night, Olivia. Good night, Garrett. She watched until his figure disappeared into the darkness, then entered her cottage and secured the door as instructed. Sleep would be impossible now, with anxiety for Garrett's safety competing with the lingering warmth of his kiss. Olivia built up her fire and settled into the chair by the window, a book open but unread in her lap. From here, she could see a portion of Main Street, though the silver dollar lay beyond her view. The town seemed eerily quiet after the festivity of the dance. Hours passed with no discernible activity. Occasionally, she heard hoofbeats or voices as revelers made their way home, but nothing to suggest the confrontation Garrett had anticipated. Perhaps Wells had already fled, or perhaps the sheriff had decided to wait until morning after all. Just as exhaustion began to overcome her vigilance, a sharp crack split the night, unmistakably a gunshot, followed quickly by several more. Olivia jolted upright, heart pounding as she strained to see anything through her window. The sounds had come from the direction of the saloon. More shots followed, then shouts and the thunder of running feet. Lanterns bloomed along Main Street as townspeople emerged to investigate the commotion. Every instinct urged Olivia to join them, to find out if Garrett was safe, but his warning kept her rooted in place. Suddenly, horses galloped past her cottage, 3 riders moving fast, heading out of town. In the dim light, she couldn't identify them, but she felt certain Wells was among them, fleeing justice once again. The night stretched endlessly as Olivia waited for news, for a knock at her door, for any sign of what had transpired. When gray dawn finally lightened the sky, she could bear it no longer. Throwing a shawl over her shoulders, she hurried toward town. Main Street was unnaturally busy for early morning. Groups of citizens clustered in conversation, while outside the doctor's office, several men stood smoking with grim expressions. Olivia approached Mrs. Cooper, who was among a group of women outside the general store. "What happened?" she asked without preamble. "I heard shooting." Mrs. Cooper's eyes widened at Olivia's disheveled appearance. "Oh, my dear, it was terrible. Sheriff tried to arrest Howard Wells at the Silver Dollar. There was a gunfight. They say 3 men are dead and Wells escaped with some of his men." "Dead?" Olivia's blood ran cold. "Who?" "One of Wells's men for certain, and Deputy Collins." The woman lowered her voice. "And they say that bounty hunter, the one who escorted you to the dance, was shot badly." The world tilted precariously. "Garrett, where is he?" "At the doctor's, I believe." But Olivia was already moving, propriety forgotten, as she rushed toward the doctor's office. The men outside fell silent as she approached, their expressions confirming her fears before she could even ask. "Miss Sinclair," one began awkwardly. "Perhaps you shouldn't." She pushed past them, entering the building without knocking. The front waiting room was empty, but voices came from the treatment room beyond. Without hesitation, she continued forward. Sheriff Daniels stood beside a surgical table where Dr. Bennett worked over a still form. Blood-soaked cloths covered the floor, and the metallic scent of it filled the air. On the table lay Garrett, unnaturally pale, his chest bare except for fresh bandages already showing crimson. "Miss Sinclair." The sheriff stepped toward her, blocking her view. "You shouldn't be here." "How bad is it?" she demanded, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror gripping her heart. Dr. Bennett glanced up, his spectacles smeared with blood. "Bullet punctured his lung. Another grazed his temple. He's lost a lot of blood." "Will he live?" The doctor and sheriff exchanged glances. "Too early to say," Bennett finally answered. "Next 24 hours will tell." "What happened?" she asked the sheriff, needing to understand while simultaneously wishing she could forget the sight of Garrett's blood-drained face. Daniels guided her to a chair in the corner, speaking low. "Wells must have been tipped off. Had men waiting when we arrived. Garrett took a bullet meant for me, then another when he pursued Wells out the back door." His expression hardened. "Wells and 2 others escaped, but we've got posses forming now. They won't get far." "May I stay with him?" Olivia asked, her eyes fixed on Garrett's still form. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Miss Sinclair, it wouldn't be proper." "Damn propriety," she snapped, then immediately regretted her outburst. More calmly, she added, "Please, Sheriff, I need to be here." After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. "I need to organize the posses anyway. But the school board won't look kindly on this, you understand." "I understand perfectly." When the men departed, Olivia moved her chair beside Garrett's table. His breathing was shallow and labored, each inhale seeming to cause pain even in unconsciousness. She took his hand, shocked by how cold it felt. "You promised to come back," she whispered, blinking back tears. "I'm holding you to that, Garrett Thorne." The hours blurred together as she maintained her vigil. Dr. Bennett returned periodically to check Garrett's condition, looking increasingly concerned as fever set in by midday. Olivia bathed Garrett's face with cool cloths, spooned water between his lips when he seemed able to swallow, and prayed with an intensity she hadn't felt since childhood. Mrs. Hathaway appeared shortly after noon, her expression a mixture of disapproval and concern. "Miss Sinclair, your absence has been noted. The children were sent home when you failed to appear at the schoolhouse." Olivia had completely forgotten her duties in her concern for Garrett. "I apologize for not sending word. As you can see, there were extenuating circumstances." The older woman's gaze softened slightly as she observed Garrett's condition. "Yes, well, the council is quite disturbed by last night's events. Mr. Wells was a prominent citizen, and this pursuit has divided the town considerably." "A prominent citizen who murdered an innocent man," Olivia replied, her patience wearing thin, "and nearly killed another last night." "That remains to be proven," Mrs. Hathaway said stiffly. "In any case, your attachment to Mr. Thorne has raised questions about your judgment and suitability as teacher." Olivia stood, facing the woman directly. "Are you dismissing me, Mrs. Hathaway?" "Not at present, but the council will meet tomorrow to discuss the matter." Her expression softened marginally. "For what it's worth, my dear, I argued against hasty action. Your work with the children has been exemplary." "Thank you. Please inform the council I will abide by their decision, whatever it may be." Olivia returned to Garrett's side, "But I will not leave him while his life hangs in the balance." After Mrs. Hathaway departed, Olivia allowed herself a moment of despair. In the span of 24 hours, her carefully constructed new life was crumbling around her. The position she had pinned her independence upon was likely forfeit, and the man who had unexpectedly captured her heart lay fighting for his life. "Seems I've caused you trouble again," came a weak voice from the table. Olivia's head jerked up to find Garrett's eyes open, glazed with fever but lucid. "Garrett, thank God. Not sure he had much to do with it," he murmured, wincing as he tried to shift position. "Wells escaped. The sheriff has passes searching." She squeezed his hand. "Don't worry about that now. You need to conserve your strength." He closed his eyes briefly. "Heard what the mayor's wife said about your position. It doesn't matter. It does." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "You came west for a fresh start, not to throw in with a broken-down bounty hunter." Olivia leaned closer, her free hand gently touching his face. "I came west for independence. That includes the freedom to choose my own path and whom I walk it with." A ghost of his usual half-smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman, practical man." She brushed hair from his forehead. "Now rest. We'll sort everything else when you're stronger." Garrett drifted back to sleep, his breathing still labored but slightly more regular. Dr. Bennett, returning to check on his patient, seemed cautiously optimistic. "Fever hasn't worsened, which is a good sign. If infection doesn't set in, he might pull through yet." Sheriff Daniels returned at dusk, his expression grim but determined. "Passes tracked Wells and his men to the territorial border, lost the trail there. I've sent telegrams to every sheriff within 100 miles, but—" He shrugged helplessly. "He's escaped justice again," Olivia concluded. "For now, but men like that can't help making enemies. His time will come." The sheriff glanced at Garrett. "How is he?" Woke briefly, still very weak. Daniels nodded. "He's tough, too stubborn to die easy." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Sinclair, I should warn you there's talk in town about your relationship with Thorne and your continued presence here." Mrs. Hathaway already delivered that message, Olivia replied wearily. "The school board meets tomorrow to decide my fate. For what it's worth, I'll speak on your behalf, and Thorne's." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "Never believed he was after revenge, despite what some claimed. Man could have shot Wells last night when he had the chance. Chose to try and bring him in proper instead." The revelation didn't surprise Olivia. Despite his hard exterior, Garrett had consistently chosen the honorable path, from sheltering a stranded woman to pursuing justice through legal means when violence would have been simpler. "Thank you, Sheriff. Your support means a great deal." After Daniels left, Olivia continued her vigil through the night. Garrett's fever peaked near midnight, his body alternating between chills and sweats, occasional murmurs escaping his lips most unintelligible, though she heard her name more than once. She sponged his brow, whispered reassurances, and refused Dr. Bennett's suggestion that she return home for rest. By morning, the fever had broken. Garrett woke more lucid, though still desperately weak. Dr. Bennett pronounced the improvement significant. "Lungs still damaged, but if we can prevent infection, he should recover." "Slowly," he emphasized with a pointed look at his patient. "No exertion for at least 6 weeks." "Understood," Garrett rasped, his voice rough from dryness and disuse. When the doctor stepped out, Garrett turned to Olivia. Her exhaustion must have shown plainly on her face, for his expression softened with concern. "You've been here all night." She nodded, too tired for pretense. "I couldn't leave. The school board meets today." She attempted a smile. "I've weathered dismissals before, I'll manage." His hand found hers, squeezing with more strength than she expected. "This isn't what I wanted for you, I know." She returned the pressure. "But it's what I choose." A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Daniels entered, followed by Mayor Hathaway. Both men looked uncomfortable. "Miss Sinclair," the mayor began formally, "the school board has convened early given the circumstances. They request your presence immediately." Olivia stood, smoothing her wrinkled dress as best she could. After nearly 36 hours without sleep or change of clothes, she knew she presented a far cry from the proper schoolteacher image. "Of course. I'll come directly." Garrett's hand caught hers again. "Olivia." "I'll return afterward," she promised, then followed the men out into the bright morning light. The town looked different, somehow smaller, less welcoming than it had just days before. Citizens watched her passage with curious eyes, some sympathetic, others judgmental. Olivia held her head high, drawing on reserves of dignity she hadn't needed since leaving Boston society behind. The school board had assembled in the town hall, 5 men and 2 women, including Mrs. Hathaway. Their expressions ranged from discomfort to outright disapproval as Olivia entered. "Miss Sinclair," began Mr. Peterson, the bank manager who had apparently wished to dance with her, "we've called this meeting to address concerns about recent events and their reflection on the school." Olivia clasped her hands before her. "I understand. Your association with Mr. Thorne, culminating in your absence from school duties yesterday, has created a situation the board finds problematic. Mr. Thorne was gravely injured while assisting the sheriff in apprehending a murderer," she replied evenly. "I chose to remain with him during a critical period. I make no apologies for that decision." Mrs. Hathaway shifted uncomfortably. "The issue, Miss Sinclair, is not merely your absence, but the public nature of your attachment. Teachers must maintain the highest moral standards as examples to impressionable children." "And has my moral character been impugned in some way?" Olivia asked directly. "Have I behaved inappropriately with my students or in my teaching duties?" "Well, no," admitted Peterson. "Your teaching has been exemplary. But this association, with a man who nearly died pursuing justice for his murdered brother," Olivia finished. "A man who, by Sheriff Daniels's own account, chose lawful means over violence even when the latter would have been easier." The board members exchanged glances. One of the women, Mrs. Larson, whose twins were in Olivia's class, cleared her throat. "The children adore you, Miss Sinclair. My boys have learned more in these few weeks than in a year with the previous teacher." She looked around the table. "Perhaps we're being hasty in our judgment." Before anyone could respond, the door opened and Sheriff Daniels entered, followed by Dr. Bennett. The doctor looked agitated. "Forgive the interruption," Daniels said, "but I thought the board should hear this before making their decision." Dr. Bennett stepped forward. "I've just received a telegram from the territorial marshal. Howard Wells was killed this morning attempting to rob a bank in Grayson County. Before he died, he confessed to ordering the murder of Owen Thorne 3 years ago." A murmur went through the room. The sheriff continued, "Furthermore, among Wells's possessions they found documents proving he embezzled from several businesses here in Prosperity, including the bank." He glanced meaningfully at Peterson. "Marshall's sending everything back with a deputy tomorrow." The implications settled over the room like dust after a windstorm. The man many had defended, whose accusation had nearly cost Olivia her position, had proven himself a murderer and thief. And Garrett Thorne, whose presence had caused such consternation, had been right all along. Mayor Hathaway recovered first. "Well, this certainly casts matters in a different light." "Indeed," agreed Peterson, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Perhaps we've been premature in our concerns about Miss Sinclair's judgment." Olivia maintained her composure, though relief and vindication warred within her. "Does this mean the board has reconsidered my position?" The members exchanged glances before Mrs. Hathaway spoke. "Miss Sinclair, in light of these revelations, the board sees no reason to question your continued employment. Your personal associations are your own affair, provided they don't interfere with your duties." "Thank you," Olivia replied simply. "May I be excused? I would like to inform Mr. Thorne of these developments." With the board's dismissal, Olivia hurried back to the doctor's office, her step lighter despite her exhaustion. She found Garrett sitting propped against pillows, looking pale but alert. "Wells is dead," she announced without preamble. "Shot during a bank robbery. He confessed before he died." Surprise, then a complex mixture of emotions crossed Garrett's face: relief, vindication, and something like regret. "It's over then?" "Yes." She moved to his side, taking his hand. "And the school board has decided I may keep my position, regardless of my personal associations." A ghost of his half-smile appeared. "Convenient timing." "Very." She squeezed his fingers. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo." He studied her face. "You look exhausted." "I am." She stifled a yawn, "but it was worth it." His expression turned serious. "What happens now, Olivia?" The question encompassed far more than his recovery or her teaching position. It reached toward their future separately or together. "That depends," she said carefully, "on whether a certain bounty hunter plans to move on once he's healed, or if he might consider putting down roots." Hope flickered in his eyes. "Roots haven't been part of my life for a long time. Perhaps it's time to try growing some." She held his gaze steadily. "If you had the right reason to stay." His hand tightened around hers. "I can think of one very compelling reason." The weeks that followed brought healing for Garrett's body, for the town's divided opinions, and for the tentative relationship blooming between the schoolteacher and the former bounty hunter. Garrett's recovery progressed slowly, as Dr. Bennett had warned. He moved from the doctor's office to a room at the hotel, where Olivia visited daily, always with a chaperone present to maintain proprieties. As October gave way to November, the first snows dusted Prosperity. Garrett grew stronger, able to take short walks along Main Street, his arm often supporting Olivia's as much as hers supported his. The townspeople gradually adjusted to their companionship, particularly as the full extent of Wells's crimes came to light. The man had not only murdered Owen Thorne and embezzled from local businesses, but had been involved in cattle rustling operations that had damaged several local ranches. Sheriff Daniels, impressed by Garrett's commitment to legal justice, offered him a position as deputy once he recovered fully. The invitation represented more than employment, it was acceptance, a chance to become part of the community he had once left in anger. On a crisp December afternoon, Garrett walked Olivia home from school, their breath forming clouds in the winter air. He moved more easily now, though he still tired quickly. "Sheriff asked me again about the deputy position," he said as they approached her cottage. "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd consider it." He glanced sideways at her. "Would be a change from bounty hunting. Less travel, more stability." "Stability has its merits," she replied carefully, her heart quickening. They reached her porch, where propriety dictated they should part with formal farewells. Instead, Garrett took both her hands in his. "I've been thinking about what you said, about roots." His eyes held hers steadily. "Never thought I'd want them again. After the war, after Owen, seemed easier to keep moving. And now I find myself wanting things I gave up on long ago. A home, community." His voice softened. "Someone to share it with." Olivia's breath caught. "Garrett, I love you, Olivia Sinclair. Have since that first night by the fire, I think, though I was too stubborn to admit it." His hands tightened around hers. "I'm not a wealthy man. Can't offer you the life you might have had in Boston. But if you'll have me, I promise to spend every day trying to be worthy of you." Joy bubbled up within her, bright and unexpected as spring water in desert rock. "I don't want Boston or St. Louis or anywhere but here with you. Is that a yes?" "Yes," she whispered, propriety forgotten as she stepped closer. "Yes, Garrett Thorne, I will marry you." His kiss was gentle but thorough, his arms drawing her against him with careful strength. When they finally parted, his eyes shone with a happiness she'd never seen there before. "Reckon we've given the gossip something new to talk about," he murmured, nodding toward several wide-eyed passers-by. Olivia laughed, beyond caring about town opinion. "Let them talk. We've earned this happiness." They were married on Christmas Eve in Prosperity's small church, snow falling gently outside while candlelight illuminated the simple ceremony within. Sheriff Daniels stood as Garrett's best man, while Mrs. Cooper's daughter attended Olivia. The church was full not merely with the curious, but with genuine well-wishers. In the months since Wells's death, the truth had unified the town rather than divided it. Garrett had accepted the deputy position, and they had purchased a small house at the edge of town close enough for Olivia to walk to the schoolhouse. With enough land for the horses, Garrett intended to raise as a side business. It wasn't the life either had envisioned when they'd met that stormy night on the plains, but it was richer, fuller than what they'd imagined for themselves alone. As spring returned to Wyoming, bringing green to the plains and warmth to the lengthening days, Olivia often thought back to that rainy night when a stranger had called through the downpour, "I've got room beside my fire." She had found far more than temporary shelter in Garrett Thorne's offer. She had found home, partnership, and a love that had weathered storms both literal and figurative. The journey had not been easy, but standing beside him on their small porch, watching sunset paint the distant mountains gold, Olivia knew with bone-deep certainty that every step had led exactly where she was meant to be. And 5 years later, as they watched their twin daughters chase fireflies across their expanded homestead, with a son growing beneath Olivia's heart, that certainty had only deepened. The schoolteacher and the former bounty hunter had built something neither had dared hope for when fate and rain first brought them together: a life of purpose, community, an abiding love that grew stronger with each passing season.